Okay, so today we're going to glass on a leash loop, and it's going to be more of an old school kind of style. So what most everybody's used to seeing is something like this, which is this piece of plastic with a stainless steel rod. Drill a hole in the deck, glass it in, sand it out, and you're finished. But what we're going to do is trying to keep with the old school kind of retro-ish, if you will. I don't want to call it completely retro. Is we're going to make a leash loop right here out of fin rope, and in my opinion they're a little bit stronger, less likely to pull out of the board, but a lot of people aren't familiar with them, so not the number one choice of most people ordering their custom boards lately. So anyways, we're going to get set up to do this, so follow along. I always just put a little piece of tape and paper down here to help keep from getting drops and garbage on the board that I don't want. So nothing more than just a little work platform. Here's the fin rope I was talking about. A couple of pieces here that I've already used. There it is. Okay. This is nothing more than fiberglass rope. That's all it is. So, figure out the right length for what I'm looking for here. Cut myself a little extra. Now what I do is I double up and triple up the fin rope, so don't think that this is the only thickness. I like to make them a little bit thicker and heavier so they don't pull out. The other thing worth noting here is that the board is currently in the lamb state, so it's not been hot coated, which basically means I can lay this on without sanding or grinding or anything, because there's a texture here from the lamb coat. It's got another surface wax in it, so it's ready to accept another layer. You could grind it a little bit, but I found it really doesn't make a difference. They're both just as equally strong. And I prefer not to grind into this lamb coat because it's really the base for the rest of the board, you know, as far as the structural integrity of the board and weakness, and especially back here you don't want weakness. So one thing I do prefer to do with my boards is the back end here, especially on the fish or the mini Simmons or anything that's got a hard edge to it, you know, even some of the long boards that have real tight knifey rails. I've started to lay in an extra 6 and sometimes even a 6 and a 4 layers of glass in here just to help from getting any rail bands. Recently had a kid that he worked in the shop and built a board, and it was kind of a class project, and we went pretty light on the glass schedule. I think we did 4 ounce and 4 ounce. And so he was out in some really heavy surf during a recent hurricane, and you know, tombstone the board quite a few times and getting a couple of 2-wave, 3-wave hold downs, he said, and came up and it looked like the leash had actually wrapped the rail and probably went underneath and cinched it so tight that it actually cracked the glass and took a pretty decent crush right in this area. So we're gonna, you know, start making a standard that this outside edge and anything in the fish area is all basically an extra 10 to 12 ounces of glass total, just to help prevent any of that crush or possibility of crush. All right. So you can use a spreader. You can use whatever you need. You know, a small little brush or whatever. I usually don't use those. I typically just use my fingers and work it in that way. We're gonna go next door and find a post to be able to stick in the hole to make it stand up. I'll be right back. Alright, all I use is a little wooden dowel that I'll stick in there, and I'll usually just run a small piece of tape just to keep it centered up and keep it from moving around, because once you start laying down the fin rope, it'll start moving around on you, and try to keep things as centered as possible. Nothing's done with a ruler per se when you do this. It's all just placement of where you kind of want it. Now the one thing that is going to be tough, just because it's a cut lap and there's a really, you know, a lot of color back here in the fish. It's hard to see in the camera, but there is a little bit of bleeding from the blue that bled in underneath the tape. And usually it's a simple fix. You just do a little black pin line or something, you know, maybe a little, you know, cream color pin line or something in there, and bring it up, and it dress up the board quite nicely. Kind of already plan on doing that for this board anyways. But with the leash loop going on, the leash loop is actually going to go over right about where the V comes together and the color starts to bleed. So I'm going to try to keep it just ahead of that. You know, just maybe right on that edge of where the two lines come together. So, all right, I'm going to mix up some resin. Probably just going to take a couple ounces here. Not going to do much. I know this has been done quite a few times on video. I mean, well, that's where I learned to do it. But it's fairly straightforward and really doesn't take a lot. I really only found one good quality video online that showed me how to do this, and for whatever reason it's not widely disseminated how to do it. It's even worse is how to glass on a, you know, like a longboard fin and make a longboard fin. Even those are getting harder and harder to find. So that's the reason why I'm doing this, is to pass the knowledge on a little bit out there. Okay, so this is going to be laminating resin. I'm not going to use the hot coat resin. I'm not going to add any wax to it because I don't want to sand it. I just want to get it placed on, get it nice and strong, get a good bond to this coat, this layer here. And what it does is once that bond's on, basically if this thing was to ever break or come out, it is going to peel. It would have to peel almost all this glass off that's already on the board. So it's the two together is so strong. I have this on a couple of 9-footers, a 10-0, you know, big heavy, you know, logs, and you know, I'll take those out and run them in, you know, head high surf, and no issues whatsoever. There's no stress cracks, there's no breakage, never had anything with them. So I'm sold on them, and a lot of my customers are starting to get very confident with them and starting to get a few more requests for them. So all right, so all I did was 3 ounces. Mix it up with a little, it's a little bit cold today. In here right now is 68 degrees. And that's because I've had the heater going all morning. It's 30 degrees waking up this morning. Got this nor'easter coming in, so winds and cold are starting to come. So I got to play more and more with the temperature game, playing with the resin and mixing and curing and how much catalyst to put in. It'd be nice to live in 72 degrees year round, but unfortunately that is not the case. You got to learn how to mix resin in 50 degree and 105 degree weather and everything in between. Subsequently, I've had a few incidents with too quick of cure and too quick of setting up, which is really not a lot of fun when you're trying to do a lamb coat. Okay. So what I do with these roving rope here is I just break them down a little bit. You can see they're really, really tightly wound together. And all I do is I just whack them over something to try to break them up a little bit. Just to get some of those fibers loosened up to accept the resin, because it's so tight that it won't want to accept it. Alright, you will need your scissors, and you will need scissors that are going to get trashed. So all you want to do is you want to bring this down, get it wetted out. It's kind of a pain when you're doing 3-ounce little baby cups like this, but that's why I always keep the stir stick handy. Get it down in there. You always want to leave yourself, a good couple of inches just to keep in your fingers and work with. I don't like having a handful of resin. Okay. A little bit more. There we go. All right. Now, most people like to do this over the ground because it just starts to get drippy, drippy, drippy. But just try to be smooth with it. So I'll do one. Most people do one. The first one just kind of gets the bulk of it out, and I can actually see little air bubbles still in the fin rope, the roving rope. So I stick it down in to let it saturate for a second time. There's no wrong way to do it. It's just getting saturation the best you can, and you're going to get a lot of little extra hairs that come off. You can kind of see them there stringing off my fingers. All right. So now you lay over the first coat. So this is really, really simple. I'm going to step to this side so you can kind of see it a little differently. Okay, so the first one I try to lay out and try to get it feathered out, fanned out, if you will, whatever you want to call it. So you get a good, maybe 1.5 to 2 inch downward pull on it. So you can see instead of just being that skinny on the board, it's actually about 5 times that width on the board. Now you get little drips here and there. Don't worry about them. You can, pick them off as it starts to cure. You can sand them out if you really needed to. I like to pick them off right when they're starting to cure up. They come right off, no problem. Okay, so then I take the second one. Now I've seen people do this where they just literally, they take one big hunk of rope and lay it on there, and I'm sure it works just fine. For me, I prefer to do it in a couple layers. And the last one is kind of something I started doing recently that makes things a little bit easier. When it comes time to sand it and everything else. So there we go, starting to mate it up, and I'll move the camera once I get it set and get my gloves off so you can kind of see what it looks like. Okay. Now what I'll do is, okay, I can see a big bubble right there. So you get little bubbles right on the side where it starts to come off and come up and over. And you got to kind of punch those out. Because air bubbles underneath there is create a weakness. So what I do is I put a little patch right over the top. And because this is only a 5'10" fish, all right, we don't need much more. Now, it's going to look like there's a ton on there, and there actually is. But part of that is because I need to have something to be able to sand into. I never want to make it too thin and then have to go back and try to build a bandage over it or something like that. That just doesn't make sense. I'm actually going to take a little bit of it off. There we go. All right. Just a little bit too bulky. It took a little bit out. I was worried about it being a little bit too humped up in the middle there. So all I'm doing now is trying to make this as even as possible as far as the same amount over here, the same amount over here, so that when I put the hot coat on and I actually draw it all together, it'll look uniform. Because as you can see, there is no measurements, there is no, yeah, that is ugly, whatever that was. All right. And then you just get to a point where you got to kind of stop messing with it because it's gonna set off and cure, and it is made by your fingers, so it's never gonna be 100%. So I can see how. All right. All right. So that is all set. Looks about even, I would say. So a lot of times, like I said, people will move them further back. There is kind of a cool thing when you put them back here. But, you know, this one I think I'm going to keep a little bit forward. I like where it sits. All right. And as usual, I'll take my gloves off and then I'll find something I have to fix and I'll end up having to touch it and get sticky fingers and all that. But I think anybody that does this regularly will tell you that they get sticky fingers doing it no matter what. Kind of unavoidable. Like I said, a lot of people will use some type of little squeegee or paintbrush, something like that to help feather it out. I tried it one time, it never worked for me. Yeah, see, there I go, I'm touching it again, so. And take these drops out now. All right, so what I'll do is this piece of wood, the little dowel, that'll stay in there probably for the next 20 minutes or so, I'd say. And then I'll wind up taking it out just as it's curing. So it'll get, the glass and the resin will get kind of almost putty-like consistency, so it won't collapse. The bridge won't collapse. And what I'll do is I'll take it out just at that point, and then it will cure out the rest of the way. It won't sink. It'll sit perfectly. Just nice little hump right there. And then when it's all said and done, and it's all cured up, and I've hot coated the board, and there's hot coat resin that's been cured up all around this and over top and on the underside, then I'll come through and I'll actually take a Dremel and I'll just kind of grind out and smoothen this so that it's not sharp and that it's not going to cut the leash rope. Nothing like that. Make it smooth and seamless. So this is about maybe about 130%, 140% the actual size of what it's going to be when it's said and done. So it is amazing for everybody out there that does not build boards. It is amazing the amount of trash that is accumulated and collected over the process of building a board. I think as shapers we have a responsibility to try to do everything we can to reduce the waste. And unfortunately some people, I'm not going to say names or anything, but some people will reduce waste by taking shortcuts and, you know, cutting corners, if you will, to try to save, you know, $5 and to try to save, you know, some waste, I guess. But there's certain areas you just can't, you can't play around with. Sorry, I just take a little acetone on my fingers to clean up some of that stickiness from the drips. Alright. I'll bring you in so you can see it a little bit closer now. So there, I don't know how much of that you could see from when I was actually doing it. So you can see what you want to do is you want this side where you fan it out right here, and you want this side where you fan it out to be about as even as possible. And you can see that's pretty close. So like I said, it's not 100%. I'm sure some guys out there, they'll take and they'll, you know, get a ruler out and they'll measure and they'll get exactly, you know, 2 inches over here and exactly 2 inches over here or whatever. If you're into that kind of preciseness, more power to you. When it comes to rails and you know, shapes of rails and consistency from the left side to the right side of the rail, or the board, excuse me, then absolutely down to the, you know, 32nd of an inch matters. But putting on a leash loop like this does not matter that much. You won't even notice it. That's the other thing, is when this is all hot coated and sanded, these areas right here, you won't even notice. You won't even notice them. So I think my customer V is going to be happy with this. She's, I knew there was a drip in there. Not a novice surfer, but she's still learning, so it's a little bit bigger fish. Hopefully to get her through that transition point of going from a mid-range to a smaller board. So, but like I said, there's 2 options. You can either do this, or you can put one of those in. And like I said, there's the, I don't know if you can see it now. So there's a little stainless steel pin. These are the FCS ones. I actually like these ones a lot better because when you drill the hole, it makes it real nice. You just, you know, I cheat. I use the FCS fin plug boring tool. You just drill a hole with that, make it go that depth, equal, and when that's in there, you set it in just below the lip, and you glass right over top of it, which makes, so right there you can see that lip. You kind of see it there. So that lip, you'll wind up getting, like, you can get 6 ounces of glass or 10 ounces of glass, 8 ounces, whatever you glass the deck with, goes right over top of it, so it holds it in really, really nice. These are actually a lot better than the other ones I've seen, and these are, I highly, highly recommend these ones. They're a little bit more money, but I do recommend these. You're going to get a lot less likelihood of popping out and, you know, breaking and ripping the glass, or, you know, losing the whole thing. So something to think about when you're talking to your shaper about building board for you, or you're thinking about maybe building your own board or doing repairs or whatever. Tons of options out there, and I hope you guys learned something. As boring as it may seem, it wasn't overly exciting as shaping a board or glassing a board. But definitely something a little unique, and you don't see it every day. So yeah, see, I can't keep my fingers off it, and that's a problem. Just keep moving around with it, just because I try to make it as even as possible. And it looks like it's already starting to set just a little bit. Yeah. Now once it starts to set, you really want to just keep your fingers off and quit touching it. So I've learned my lesson the hard way too many times. But all right, there again, if anybody is interested in a custom board and you're particularly in New England, come on up to my shop, or you can give me a call. You can check my website. I'd be happy to talk boards, and we can set you up with something that's used or new or custom. I love creative ideas, so if you got something wild and crazy you want to build or you want to try to ride, let me know, and we'll build something for you. So, all right, thank you for listening, and we'll be back soon.